Hey there, welcome to episode 1 of Cartridges and Casings, my live stream series covering all sorts of military history from the 17th century to the present. And today, for the first episode, happy to have back on is Josh Shope
Shope.
of Shope. I got it right. Okay. Josh, Mr. Shope, if you could give us an introduction of yourself, who you are, and what you're known for.
So Reenactor and Gunsmith got started really in reenacting because I watched The Patriot, thought the Flintlocks were cool, wanted to get a Flintlock, and who has them and knows about them is reenactors. So fell in with the 5th Connecticut while I was in the Navy, stationed up in Connecticut. And since then, I've joined like 6 different units, as many impressions, if not more. And traveling all over the place for all the cool events. I bring a traveling gunsmithing kit and set up at events and work on folks' guns that need some work.
And for those that don't quite know of you on the East Coast, you are the author of the Modern Musketeer. You have that traveling gunsmith setup that you got going on, and on the East Coast, amongst all the reenacting regiments that I know of, you're well known and well respected because somebody that takes the time to reenact gunsmithing is quite impressive. So tell us a little bit more about the gunsmithing, just the history of that.
Without tools are good, right? I can pick up the chest of tools.
Yeah, you can bring it. Yeah. So what kind of tools does a gunsmith have?
Yeah. So this is a toolbox. It's based off of one from I believe it's from the 1700s. Colonial Williamsburg has it, and they believe it's a cobbler, like a journeyman cobbler's box. It's got these loops on the inside here. I can tilt it. You can see these loops here for holding tools. So I figure, that's a pretty nice design. Got this rope here, and then I can carrying. And then the handle is out for easy access to all your stuff. And the tools of a gunsmith, really, you're kind of a jack of all trades. You have to be able to do a little bit of everything. A lot of what I do at events is metalwork because the main problem that I see is either a lock goes off half-cocked or doesn't hold full cock, or it doesn't spark very well. Mechanical issues like that are kind of the most pressing issues someone needs repaired. So the number one most used tool for me is this set of files right here. These are Swiss needle files. I got them on eBay for pretty price. Grobet, for anyone who's wanting to become an armorer for their unit. Look for Swiss Grobet files, just different shapes and sizes here. But I do a lot of my work with that, working on the tumbler, the sear, just kind of reshaping things, trying to remove interferences, stuff like that. So that's kind of like the biggest thing. And then I have a few tools that help along with that. This is a little hand vise right here. So this is actually from the 18th century, made by a gunmaker named P. Stubbs. It's just a little clamp that, gives you better grip on things as you're filing or trying to bend or what have you.
How does one get an original?
So honestly, eBay is kind of the main place that I go to look. And most of the time, it's not going to say 18th century tool. It'll just say antique or vintage or something like that. And a lot of times it'll be mislabeled. The gun tools in particular are often mislabeled. But usually, like, these tools don't have any markings on them. Like this pair of pliers right here, they're called box lock. So rather than just fitting together like this, your normal pliers, they actually fit inside one another. So it makes for a very strong joint. I don't know that these are 18th century, but based on that design and the decorations on them, this is, if not 18th century, it's probably early 19th. So really, in order to get historical tools, you can't just like Google 18th century gunsmith tools. You have to figure out what they look like first, and then go look for tools and match up what tools you find to what you know about 18th century tools. So there's a couple good sources for that, like John Wick's catalog of clockmakers tools. So like I could lay these over the top of a pair of pliers in there and they'd match up perfectly. So that's how I know that these are appropriate for 18th century. Same with this saw right here, which is also made by P Stubbs. So I know that it's 18th century, but this I could also overlay in that book and you know, it'll match up. So that's a good way, because most of the time you're not going to see like a maker's marker or anything on these common tools. But eBay
And you were saying
auction sites,
okay.
those are, just eBay and auction sites, they're kind of the main places that I find this stuff. I also make some of my own. I make, you know, little things like turn screws, some gun tools. You know, I'll make some of my own stuff as well.
So what pieces do you work on the most? What's the biggest failure point, at least in the reenacting world?
That is an excellent question.
Or which ones stand out? We're here for excellent.
Yeah, so the one that everybody thinks about is the hammer being too soft. So the hammer being the 18th century term for the frizzen or the pan. So a lot of times, like your gun doesn't spark very well, they go, oh, my frizzen is soft. And then the solution to that is to harden it. Sometimes it's not. So like, you know, a lot of times someone will be like, hey, I need this hardened. And, you know, I find out that it's hard as glass and there's some other issue going on. But that's a pretty common one, and it's pretty basic. It's easy to test for. You just take a file and you scrape it across the face of the frizzen. And if it leaves a mark, then it's too soft. It needs to be harder than a file for it to make good sparks. So that's a really common one for like the gun not sparking very well. I would say I pretty frequently see issues with the half cock and full cock. And with the half cock, usually it's wood or metal interference where either the trigger is constantly pushing up on the sear, so it never actually fully engages, or wood is pushing up on the sear, something's locking up, so that it never is allowing the sear to click into that half cock position. Or on the full cock, if it's flipping off full cock, there is a relationship with the angles that that needs to be resolved. And let me see if I can sketch this out.
And the half cock and full cock, I feel like there are some terminology things that we can kind of discuss here while you're off screen. The function, the part that comes back, that is your cock. So a firearm going off half cock, that's because the cock is back half. What we call the hammer, sometimes I think it's in percussion guns. I think that's where the problem we have with terminology. In percussion guns, that is actually the hammer, the thing that you pull back. That is called a hammer on a percussion gun. On a flintlock, that's called a cock. To make it even worse is that what people call a frizzen all the time is actually a hammer. That part of the the part of the pan covering that the flint will hit that creates the spark, that is actually the hammer. And we know it's the hammer because if you just for easy Googling, if you go to the von Steuben Rules and Regulations for Order and Discipline of Troops of the United States, 1779, you can go to the Manual of Arms, and he refers to that part not as a frizzen, but as a hammer. I know this because I get this comment in my comment section all the time, but within the reenacting world. And then you also have what's called the hammer stalls as well. That is the leather piece that goes over the hammer. And it's unfortunate because stall, you go, oh, it just stops the hammer from going into the frizzen, but it is what it is. There's just the more you know about terminology, the better. But yeah, I'll let you take back over there, Mr. Shope.
So here is a sear. Kind of a really rough, really quick sketch. Let's see if you can see. Is that coming through clearly at all? Can you see like a hole? And
I can see that. Yep.
All right.
I can see it.
So I'll shade in this hole here because that's important. So this
And
hole,
for those wondering why we can't touch an actual replica, is it's YouTube live stream rules are absolutely nothing to do. You cannot have any hands on any sort of mechanism. So that's why we are drawing today.
How's that? Or is that washed out?
Bring it closer to the camera, and yeah, that's good.
Good enough? All right.
Yeah.
I'll make the lines a little darker. All right, so here's your sear. The sear is the thing that locks into the tumbler, and it's what is resisting the rotation of the tumbler. So the trigger pushes up on the back, and this is the pivot point right here. This is the screw goes in there. The whole thing rotates up and down, I guess, up and down like this. And you've got a tail back here, so it kind of sticks out. Imagine like that, right? When you pull that trigger, it pushes up on this. This comes down, and then you've got your full cock notch of your tumbler right there going around, and your tumbler has a pivot point as well up here. So the tumbler has this notch. The tumbler wants to rotate. It wants to spin around. And specifically, when the gun is going off, it wants to rotate counterclockwise. So that's connected directly to the cock. When it rotates counterclockwise, that's your cock slamming down. You've got a mainspring that's got a hook here. It pushes down. And so that's that force that's flipping it around. So you can imagine if I'm pushing down on this and I'm trying to rotate this counterclockwise, when you've got this surface here, this is the sear and this is the tumbler, they're pushing against each other. They're pushing against each other like this. So even though, imagine two arms swinging, and if they come up and swing together like this, it can't swing. They can't swing through their arc anymore. This wants to pop out and go like that, but it won't let it because they're pushing directly at each other. So when you pull that trigger and pop the sear down, that comes out and the gun goes off. Okay. The problem happens when you've got a gun that can't hold the full cock. You pull it back to full cock and it just slips off, or it goes off, like when you barely touch it. That's a problem of geometry. So these forces, I'm going to get into a little bit of math here. These forces need to be in direct opposition to each other. They need to be pushing directly at each other. And a force can have components. So if I've got one force kind of pushing like this, one force pushing like this, they're not pushing directly at each other. There's a component force that's going to have a tendency to disengage, right? They're going to slip apart. So I need my forces to be pointing directly at each other. In order to do that, this face of the sear right here needs to be perpendicular to the tangent line of the axis of rotation. Okay, that's a lot of words. What does that mean? This rotates right here. If you point straight at the tip of the sear, straight from the center of that pivot point to the tip of the sear, that needs to be perpendicular. It needs to form a perfect T. Okay? If you have it like this, if it's angled, then you've got those component forces because the sear is wanting to rotate through that arc. And if it's perpendicular, you've got forces that are going straight out. If it's not perpendicular, you've got forces that want to continue to rotate one way or the other. So this face of the sear, and this thing is tiny. We're talking like 1 or 2 millimeters. This is a very, very small face. When this is perpendicular to that center line, then you take your full cock notch and you make it parallel to the sear. So again, if you've got these two faces and one is like this and one is like this, the forces are going to have components, and it's going to tend to slip out. With their parallel, perfectly parallel, and along that axis of rotation right there, then they'll push right against each other. So that's the critical thing. Perpendicular to this line right here, and a really nice way to do that, take your screw and set it in there, and then point the screw slot at the tip. And that can tell you where that line is, and then you look visually and see, is this nose perpendicular? And then parallel, once you've established that, because that's the most critical thing, parallel on the tumbler. Now, in an ideal world, this is also in line with the axis, with the center line of rotation for the tumbler. So whereas this is perpendicular, this is in line. That's an ideal world. That gives you a right angle. That gives you a really crisp trigger pull. You pull that trigger and it's just, there's no creep. It just goes off. But that's not always possible to get. Those decisions were made for you by the time you get to this point if you're trying to fix something. So there's not really much you can do with that if it isn't like that already. But the most critical thing, perpendicular to that line, parallel right here, and then you'll never have the gun slip off full cock. In fact, if that's done right, you should be able to take the sear spring out of the gun entirely, set it back to full cock. You'll have to push it in because all the sear spring does is make sure the nose of that sear rides along the tumbler and actually engages with the notch. But you pull that back, it should hold full cock. You should actually be able to hit it and it will hold full cock. So it's all about the geometry there. That is probably the most difficult of the common problems that I have to resolve. That one takes a lot of measurement. It takes a lot of precision, where normally most of the repairs, you don't have to be very precise, but that one takes a lot of precision.
So
and
if you buy like a Pedersoli mainspring or something, even in the modern sense, do all replicas, reproduction pieces, do those just snap right in as if you're making Legos, or do you have to do some fitting on your
Pedersoli, they're definitely castings. You can see the cast lines on a lot of those parts. I'm sure they have to do some machining to get everything fit, and I'm not really sure their manufacturing process. I would imagine that it's probably fit by hand. The user shouldn't need to do any fitting, but I mean, pretty much all of these locks, when they're made, there has to be some hand fitting. The exception to that is probably Kibler's locks, CNC, very high precision. All that geometry is locked in. They've got jigs. They've got go-no-go gauges. So those locks are solid every time, repeatable. And where I see this problem is in the Indian guns, typically, or on guns that have just been used for so long that sear face, or even the tumbler face, maybe they weren't hardened, maybe it was case hardened and it wore through. And that geometry just eventually wears away. So you can see it on a Pedersoli if the gun is 30 years old and has had heavy use, but not typically
when you work on the India-made guns. So that's like Veteran Arms, Middlesex, Military Heritage.
Yep.
I guess this doesn't apply to Military Heritage. The touch hole. Do you ever run into my Veteran Arms 1768 has a touch hole that's at an angle. It's like a 45-degree pointing towards the barrel. Is that common? Do you know any reason why they would do that?
It's pretty common, and the reason is because the plug is the breech plug is longer than they were historically, and this is actually pretty common on most modern builds. The breech plugs we use are, I don't know, like a half an inch or even longer potentially than the originals. And so what that does is, let's see if I can show this with my hands. I've got the barrel and I've got a breech plug, and that breech plug threads in, and on an original, I'm back here, and the lock has its pan set to where the touch hole is right in front of that breech plug. The tang, the relationship between the tang and the barrel, and that geometry and where the lock sits with relation to the tang and the wrist coming down, that's all set external. All that stuff has nothing really to do with the breech plug. So when you're reproducing an original gun, that lock is going to be further back because the tang geometry, the barrel geometry, the lock mortise, all of those things are set for a breech plug that's only goes that far forward. When I get a modern reproduction and I add like a 1/2 inch to that breech plug, but the tang didn't change, the lock size didn't change, nothing else changed about the geometry. So I can't just scoot that lock forward because now I've thrown off the balance of that that transition from tang sloping down into wrist where you're holding the gun. So you put the gun where it normally, you put the lock where it normally would go. So that little sliver of wood where the tang comes in. I'm doing my hands. I'm sure that this is impossible to visualize, but you're doing the same proportions. And so with that deeper breech plug, now your pan is set to where it's interfering. So now you drill through, and now you're drilling into that breech plug because it's further forward. And so what you'll see is either a angle, right? My breech plug goes this far in, and my pan is here. Then I'll just drill at a big angle to get ahead of that breech plug. Why that's a problem is that when the gun, so it's two problems. One is fouling. So the longer that channel, the more opportunity you have for fouling to build up and to block it. Two is that the way that a flintlock touches off, at least a fast one, is it's not powder burning through that hole. That powder burns very slowly. What you want is the infrared heat from the ignition itself. Infrared heat travels at the speed of light. However, infrared heat reduces power by distance to the fourth. So what that means is that if you have 16 units of heat, then in 1 unit of distance, you're down to 1 unit of heat. I might have done that math right, but maybe it's 4 units of heat. Either way, it drastically decreases. So the longer that hole, when you drill it at an angle through the barrel wall, the longer that hole, the further the distance, the more mass, cold mass around there, sucking that heat away. You are getting less heat through to the powder. So you have more chance of flash in the pan or just slow ignition because of that distance. So that's the problem with the drilled at an angle. That distance will give you a lot of misfires, specifically flash in the pan. A better solution to this, and this is seen on several originals. I've seen original breech plugs even that have this, even though they are still short. Get that touch hole as far back as they can so that it's burning forward. Is you file a notch out. I don't really have a good way to show that, but in the cylindrical face of the breech plug, it's basically like a triangle that's filed out. Oh, hello. My dog just walked in. So you'll file that notch out so that some powder can get back to there, and then you drill straight through the barrel channel. So you've got your barrel channel, and then this is the inner wall of the barrel. This is where your breech plug is. You're filing away a little bit to get that, to allow a little bit of powder to come through, and you're able to drill perpendicularly through the barrel, get that short distance. I've seen that on originals, and there's really not a concern with filing through some of those threads. Don't go crazy with it. You shouldn't file all the way back. If you need that much distance, then you're not really, there's something else wrong with it. But the mechanical strength of a screw is really, it's really just once you go deeper than the diameter of the screw, then you're not gaining that much in strength. So basically, like if your breech plug is, I don't know, like half an inch, for example, your breech plug is half an inch, and you've got half an inch in diameter, that is. And once you go in half an inch, once you go past that, it's kind of diminishing returns as for like the extra strength. So with these really long breech plugs that we have, you've got plenty of room to be able to file a knockout, maybe quarter of an inch, however much it needs. You try and get that lock positioned where it needs to be to look right. And if you have to file a little bit away from the face or from the edge of the corner of that breech plug, then you can do that.
I'd also, something I always look for when I'm collecting now is the location of the touch hole in relation to the pan, or at least how it comes in. The touch hole should generally be in the center. It shouldn't be above. The touch hole for the barrel should be clearly above the bottom of the pan. It shouldn't be too far forward, too far back, too far up, too far down. So if you're looking at originals, I mean, sometimes it's like, hey, if they got a new barrel on it, and that's fine. That could be correct to the time. But if the touch hole is like kind of riding the bottom of the pan, then that's not how they would have been made. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, and part of the reason for that is when you've got that touch hole down into the pan, then powder can get into it. And when powder gets in the touch hole, now you've got that fuse effect instead of that infrared heat. So a touch hole that's too low, filling up with powder can be pretty slow. So you want that touch hole like right at where you've got the pan. So here's the depth of your pan. Here's the top of it. If you get that touch hole right in line with that, or even slightly above, that's a good spot. And in fact, there are late Flintlock era guns that on the bottom of the pan, there's a little indent, and it's like a powder cutoff. When you shut the pan, it pushes all the powder in the pan away from the touch hole, so that there's an air gap. When that pan opens, it guarantees you an air gap, so you get that instantaneous ignition rather than that fuse effect. That's like Joseph Manton, twig, Dur's egg kind of locks in like the 1800s, early 1800s, right at the end of the Flintlock era. You start seeing stuff like that.
What's the because you're an engineer in the real.
How could you tell?
So what's what stood out to you the most in your engineering brain when looking back on historic? I guess Flintlocks, historic maintenance, historic gunsmithing, just looking back.
Yeah, honestly, it's the precision. The precision that you need to make a flintlock mechanism is actually pretty crazy. When I was talking about that sear nose and the angle to that, the relationship with the tumbler, the fact that the cock is a irregular S curve kind of shape, the way that the mainspring, when it's interacting with the foot of the tumbler, that hook there is so that when the tumbler's coming up, right, your tumbler has a foot like this. When it rotates up, that foot comes up like that. So the reason why your mainspring can't just sit flat like this is that when it comes up, that hook would be pushing up, and so your mechanical advantage is diminished. That hook is so that the mainspring is always touching on the foot from the edge of it, so that you get that full mechanical advantage. Like the fact that they knew this stuff, they couldn't calculate the forces or do the calculus to figure out the most ideal geometry of this stuff, but just through centuries of different generations of gunsmiths all tweaking things and making these minor improvements. By the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, you have some just absolutely incredible precision and advances with these mechanical devices. I mean, it's just impressive what they're able to do by hand. You've got seamless connections, dovetails that look like they're invisible. screws that leave a thousandth of an inch gap, so that no matter how hard you tighten it down, it's not going to lock down any of these components. And they were able to do all this stuff without modern machinery. In fact, it's difficult to do this stuff with modern machinery. Really not until CNC was anyone able to machine a flintlock. Basically, from the end of the actual flintlock era, most people have been making them through castings and filing them to shape, because those irregular shapes and that precision of the internal components, it's just very difficult to do, using modern machinery like a mill or a lathe. You can use those, but ultimately they need to be hand fitted. So that's always impressed me. We like to think of the 18th century, or really the past in general, as crude, but they weren't crude. I would say simple, from the perspective of they don't have electricity, so they're drilling holes with a bow wrapped around a barrel with a drill bit on it, and they're just moving that back and forth. But with that simplicity, they get amazing levels of control and amazing levels of precision. So,
my TV just randomly turned on. I'll keep talking. I'll be right.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess I can go over maybe some other tools that I've got here. I don't know if there's anything in particular. I guess I can go over this guy right here. I like to talk about. This is a mainspring vise right there. That's an 18th century mainspring vise. Actually, I've got an original one that I can show. So here's a original 18th century mainspring vise, my reproduction of it there. And I found out how these work through a 1754 French cavalry manual. I saw this illustration of this tool, and I was like, oh, that's got to be some sort of gun tool. It's got to be like a spring clamp or something. And it had letters and numbers around it. So I'm like, if there's letters near these points, that means there's an explanation for how it works. So translated that section and figured out how this thing works. And unfortunately can't really show it, but this hooks up underneath the pan. So pan is like this, and you've got your feather spring up here, and your feather spring, when you want to take the frizzen off, this is underneath the pan is the fulcrum, and you just press down. So you're pushing down on that feather spring, compressing it. You can do that holding it with one hand and then unscrew it with the other, and that's how you take the pressure off your screws so that you can safely take the lock apart. It's a really simple, really cool device.
That's the tool that you make, right?
Yep. Yeah.
I have one of those. I use it. It's much better for taking off and on the flash guard. We have a question here.
Sweet.
First, D pattern. Well, any questions, throw them out in the chat, and we'll get to them. If I can work the question into the discussion, I will add it in. If it's a question about the whole just general timing, I'll wait kind of till the end. But this one's actually related, since we're talking about gunsmithing. I know most of the guns come from Europe, but what would the folks in South Carolina do in terms of making guns? Was it just fixing guns? Or how did Americans in, say, a colony like South Carolina that doesn't have that industrial base, how do they go about getting a firearm or something like that?
Yeah, so absolutely no industrial base in the colonies, and that was by design. We were supposed to extract raw materials, send them back to the home, to the mother country. They make it into shiny things and sell it back to us at a profit. So while we had a lot of iron refineries here, we could cast iron. We were not producing a lot of steel, and we definitely were not producing barrels and locks. We did not have gun manufactories here. You had folks that could do that. You had, your gunsmith who could make a gun lock, stock, and barrel. And it's probably a small shop. They've got a couple of apprentices under a master gunsmith, and I need to look to see, try and find some records to see how long it would take them to make a gun, but they're not doing it fast. They're not cranking these things out. So yeah, really the majority of those critical components, like the lock and the barrel, especially the lock though, are getting imported from overseas. Even South Carolina. South Carolina was one of the richest colonies in the Americas. So yeah, they were absolutely, into Charleston, all the major ports. They're importing locks by the barrel full of these things. And you'll see advertisements in the newspapers for, imported locks, London warranted locks, Birmingham, but then also locks from like the Dutch and the Belgians. They had a pretty major gun trade. French as well. The French had huge manufacturing bases for locks. So you got your fusil de chasse guns, your Tull, or however I'd speak German, not French, Tulle. Those locks. But yeah, for the most part, components, particularly the lock, are imported. Now the brass work, and this is probably, I hope this is fine. The brass work, like a pipe here. This is just a ramrod pipe. Those we can make ourselves. That's pretty easy to cast brass. They've got sand casting methods. We can make our own hardware. Blacksmiths can forge trigger guards and butt plates. And we could even forge barrels as well. But again, it's just going to be cheaper to get them from overseas, because whereas you'd have one shop with a couple of apprentices trying to make an entire gun here in the gun manufacturing centers of England and all of Europe, really, you've got these clusters of craftsmen, and you'll have one guy forges the barrel, another completely different shop roughs it out with a file, another one drills the main hole, another one reams it to size, another one polishes it, another one rifles it, another one adds sights. It's like very highly specialized sort of assembly line kind of thing, but they're not all under one roof. That doesn't come until a little later. But they've got power tools. They have water-powered power hammers and lathes and even drill presses. So they have, by the end of the 18th century, the Industrial Revolution's in full swing over in Europe. They have legitimate factories going on there. So especially by then, it's just easier to import all that stuff. It's just going to be cheaper, even with the shipping transportation costs. And that's what's that?
I was going to ask, would they leave like the stock work kind of local?
Yeah, stock work would be local. Yeah, you're going to buy the lock, maybe the barrel, but a lot of the hardware and the stock especially is going to be local. So that's where you'll see a lot of American-made guns with with a German import or a London marked lock on American walnut or maple or cherry, pear, whatever fruit woods. So we were definitely stocking them ourselves here, because that's much easier to do with our own plentiful wood supply. That was one thing that was way cheaper here than in Europe, was wood. So we're absolutely going to take advantage of that and stock these things ourselves. But all this contributed. What's that?
I was just going to tag in there on what comes to collecting originals. You see this all the time, is that you see American black walnut stocks and then just a hodgepodge of locks and a hodgepodge of barrels and everything like that.
Yep.
But the American black walnut is as good as you're going to get to show that it was basically rebuilt, reassembled, reworked, and put back online here in the colonies and then the United States. But yeah, continue on. Sorry, Josh.
Yeah, and because of the difficulty, with getting guns here, they were kept in service for as long as possible. I have seen evidence of guns that were, parts were riveted back together. I've seen, cocks that were brazed back together, Sears that were brazed, the hole for the screw for the sear, wallowed out, and they brazed it back together. I haven't seen a barrel that had burst that they tried to braze back together, and then the evidence suggests that it burst again, to no one's surprise. But especially on the frontiers, one of the main jobs of your gunsmith is going to be repairs. So they're cannibalizing brass from butt plates and trigger guards in order to make braze repairs on the lock, the critical pieces of the lock, in order to keep that gun functioning. So there was certainly shortages, and that comes into clear focus at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, where we would have entire regiments showing up to Washington's army with no guns because we simply didn't have enough for them. That's why it was so critical that we're purchasing anything we could from the Spanish and the French and the Dutch and really anyone who would sell to us. So yeah, it was difficult to get them.
Anyone else has any other questions? Just throw them out in the chat. Reg in SC, we got just a whole crew of South Carolinians today. Took some mechanical apprenticeship classes when I first started with Michelin. It's amazing the precision that can be obtained with a hand file.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and like I was saying, I don't know if you were on earlier, but it's these needle files that are my most used tools. This square file here with one side ground smooth for a safe side, I use that pretty much more than any other tool. And you can do some pretty incredible things. It will take a while, but you can do some pretty incredible things with these.
So for the Continental Army, the armor would be at the brigade level? Was it built into the regimental organization, or where does the armor sit?
Yeah, so for the Continental Army, they have armorers that are under Henry Knox, or are under the quartermaster's department under, Benjamin Flowers, I believe, for the most part. So it's definitely not the regimental. Well, each regiment in the American Army doesn't necessarily have a gunsmith. Some do, like the 2nd South Carolina Regiment, they had a gunsmith with them, but that's sort of like commander's discretion rather than established practice. We had the home field advantage, so we could just send our broken stuff back to like kind of a depot level repair facility where we've got all kinds of artificers making stuff, and they're going to have all the means to be repairing things, and that's where like your Springfield Armory gets established. And what was it? There's an encampment at, what's it called, Pluckamin in Pennsylvania, where they found evidence of armorers repairing guns, fitting British bayonets to French Charlevilles by cutting off the back ring of the bayonet. It's pretty cool. Yeah, for the most part, they're sending their broken stuff to these facilities rather than repairing them in the field. I know there's some repair work in the field. I've seen a letter from George Washington to Henry Knox, who is saying, "Hey, can we get some borax for the traveling forges, because the gunsmiths can't repair anything without borax." And the borax was flux for brazing or welding. But so they were brazing and welding things to repair them, and Washington's like, we need borax in order to be able to repair these guns. So I know that there was some level of field repair going on, but it was definitely kind of haphazardly established. Comparatively, for example, the Germans, the Hessians, they had a regimental gunsmith by doctrine. So in the regimental structure, in the list of the staff of a regiment, is a Buchsenmacher, a gunsmith who traveled with the regiment with their tools. And they were required to have a certain number of spare parts, and they would keep the guns working in the field with the regiment. I don't know if they had a traveling forge. I would imagine they probably would have to be able to actually do some repairs, but I have no idea what that would have looked like. But I know that like the gunsmith for von Bose got sick in New York, was left behind when they came down to for the Southern campaign. And after a long campaign, by the time they got to after Battle of Guilford Courthouse and that whole race to the Dan deal, I believe they were part of. Their guns are fried. Their guns don't work. They haven't been repaired, and they give them to some loyalist militia, and they get new British, probably second model, or rather Shortland pattern Besses. So you can see there, like, that's how critical this was. There's not really any other evidence of German soldiers being issued British muskets throughout the war, except for this specific instance that we know of, at least. And it's because they didn't have their gunsmith on hand. Other than that, they were repairing their own stuff in the field the entire time.
It's always, I mean, regiments, as kind of like as they are today, are homogenous life forms. You have ministers and you have chaplains and medical and adjutants and your paymaster. It's supposed to be basically, I mean, at least even in the modern day Marine Corps, it's your battalion it deploys together. You have your medical and all that. So we'll get back to some questions. Did we have file makers in the States, or were all the file require such precision they had to be imported?
That's a good question. We definitely didn't have like major tool manufactories. Birmingham and Sheffield, England, were really big for tools. We imported a lot from there. I mean, this hand vise right here and this saw here were both made in Sheffield by Pete Stubbs in the 18th century. We certainly could make files. They're probably going to be fairly crude. I don't know that there were any precision file makers here in the colonies, at least not until after the Revolution or during, when we're really trying to build up our own manufacturing base. But those tools, the precision tools, are probably mostly getting imported. Gunsmiths use a lot of the same tools as like clockmakers. And yeah, there would probably be some people here, like, you're a tool maker, you move over to the colonies, and you're going to continue trying to make tools, but it just was never at the same scale or cost effectiveness as just importing things from overseas.
I'm going to drop a reference to a book in the chat I would highly recommend for anybody that's looking into this, and it's Harper's Ferry, Armory, and the New Technology by Merritt Rose Smith. Talks about Harper's Ferry Armory, the setup of it, kind of the politics, as well as the industrialization, as well as the whole Hall story. But he does talk about, like, one of the first things that they're having problems with, or the most expensive thing, is getting rasps and files and bringing those up to Harper's Ferry. And then also the other problems you have in early industrialization of, like, if the water's not flowing, they can't, like, the amount of muskets that are being made at the National Armory are lower. And then you just have kind of like what we were talking about earlier about how highly skilled it was to put a musket together, or a firelock at the time, is when they started transitioning over to the American system, and New England Yankees came down to the South, and they're like, no, you're actually going to work 40 hours a week. You're going to check in, check out. You're going to be here. Because before that had happened, it was on like an artisanal basis where I'm a master, a locksmith. As long as I make my 40 locks for the month, I can knock that out in 10 days. I can go farm. Well, when they came back in and started enforcing like that standard work time, there was some struggles. So yeah, kind of building off of what you were saying, but if you want to build off of that as well, Josh.
Yeah, Manufacturing Independence is another book that I'll recommend for anyone who's interested in the logistics of the Revolutionary War. And it's great for, detailing out the kind of early war struggles, not 1775, but once the Continental Army is established and they've really started to, like, say, okay, how are we gonna do this? from a centralized standpoint, it's fascinating the stages that they go through and the missteps. They're trying to cast cannons, and they're having a lot of trouble. So they get I think it's a French cannon, maker. There's definitely a word for that, but who comes over and teaches them how to do it, and then they're sending patterns to people, make it like this, and they're having problems with the cannonball sizes and all this stuff. So yeah, that's a really good read. Manufacturing Independence, if you're interested in the logistics of this. If you're interested more specifically in how guns were made in the 18th century, there is a book, and I'm blanking on the name. I think it's not The Evolution of the Flintlock, or maybe the Development of the Flintlock. I'll find it later. I'll have him, maybe drop the link. But it uses multiple 18th century sources to describe in great detail how flintlocks were made in the 18th century. Using Espingarda Porfeta, which is a early 18th century Portuguese book, some German sources, some French sources, some Russian sources, where this stuff was written down in some pretty incredible detail.
Is that the flintlock, its origin, development, and use?
No.
It's translated.
No, that is different. That's another fascinating book. Can you still hear and see me?
I can see you. Yep. Oh, you froze. Well, as we work on this, another great book is The Industry of the Revolution. Look at this name. French book. Engineering the Revolution by Ken Alder. Let's see if we can jump back in. But Ken Alder's Engineering Revolution, that talks about how the French went through the whole leading from the Ancien regime into early Industrial Revolution. It'll hop back on. If anyone has any questions, feel free to now ask. Apologies for the video issue. And yes, the Northern war culture was a problem for.
When you lost me, but I'm back now.
I got him. All right. Welcome back.
Hello. I found the book. It's called The Evolution of Gunmaking by Peter Smithhurst. So highly recommend that for anyone who might possibly be interested in learning about 18th century gunmaking.
Evolution of Gunmaking. Okay, I've never actually read this one.
Oh, you should. You should. I'm still working my way through it. I found it fairly recently, but that is a fantastic reference. It's got some sketches, 18th century sketches of gunsmiths working, standing at a vise and filing a lock plate, stuff like that. Stuff that I've never seen before. So yeah, that's a really cool book.
Do you have your book? Do you have your book nearby there, Josh? If you want to do a
I
shout
think
out?
I've got a copy in here.
Josh Shope also is an author, which is why it's in the thumbnail. And he wrote the book, The Modern Musketeer, which is, yeah, Josh, you could sell your own book, actually.
I don't know if this is backwards. It probably is, but yeah, it's The Modern Musketeer, a treatise of the highest importance and relevance to a member of the company, containing an introduction of the utmost brevity to the inner workings and curiosities of contemporary flintlocks. Basically, it's a operator's manual. I was a submarine officer, and anyone who is familiar with the reactor plant manual, this is the reactor plant manual for a flintlock. We start out with the principles of operation. We go through all the different names and the basic functions of each part of the flintlock, why they do what they do. Then we go into a little bit of your necessary equipment. So, turn screws, oil, brick dust, lock cases, tampions, stuff like that. We go over for unit armors. Here's some additional stuff that you'll need to be able to work on people's locks. And then And then from there, it's kind of your operating procedures. Here's what you do before an event to make sure you're ready. Here's what you do during an event to keep your gun running. You know, you do a morning battle, and now you got to make sure your gun actually goes off in the afternoon. I think we've all seen that problems with that. Everybody's guns go off in the morning, and then they don't touch them for the rest of the day. And then that afternoon battle, you just get a lot of flashes in the pan and a lot of very sad volleys. And then don't even get me started on Sunday when nobody's cleaned their locks or changed their flints. And so then you've got after action cleaning and stowing your flintlock so that you can, you know, have the best chance of keeping it ready for the next day. And, you know, there's as many ways to clean a flintlock as there are, you know, flintlocks in the world. So my method is one that works for me, and it's based on historical methods. And then a little bit of like troubleshooting stuff, some common mistakes with operating, and a little bit of basic troubleshooting. So not really teaching you how to fix it, but letting you be able to do some troubleshooting so that if you take it to a gunsmith, instead of just saying, here you go, lock doesn't work, you can say, hey, you know, my gun was going off half cocked. I took it out of the stock. It still was going off half cocked. So I think that there's a problem with the sear and the tumbler. If you can get to that point, then you're miles ahead of everybody else. You know, if it doesn't go off outside of the stock, but it goes off in the stock, you know, it's a wood problem. So, you know, it just helps you be able to narrow down what your problem is. Some references for the reading. So there's like two and a half dozen 18th century military manuals, sporting manuals, different references that I used in French, English, German to research and write this. And then a bunch of illustrations. Illustrations on the lock and all the different parts, all the different tools that you've got, and like how you use them. You know, you've got hammer stalls, lock covers, how to make a cartridge. That's your Pickering cartridge right there. We've got different kinds of spring clamps and how you use them. We've got an inspection form there that's based off Cuthbertson and modified to meet the National Park standards. So if you go through this, you'll meet all the National Park requirements. And then we've got, you know, how to stack arms, your bell of arms, and different like types of musket racks. This one's my favorite right there. That comes from a German book called Was ist jedem Offizier in Feld zu wissen nötig, which is what is necessary for every officer in the field to know. And that's, I think, a section on like guard posts or you know, camp guards, stuff like that. And it's literally just a picture of a gun leaning on a stick. So I just love that. They just took the time to make a wood print and, you know, include in this military manual, hey, lean your gun on a stick in the ground. I love that. But yeah, so it's kind of your how-to. This was designed for you to be able to hand it to a new reenactor. The very first page is how to conduct safety and why. What each of those, when we conduct a safety, like what are you actually trying to do? Because I've seen people who are, you know, performing that safety evolution, and they are changing it to make it pass. And you know, if you don't understand why the safety procedure, you know, search arms, why you're doing that, then you know you've got issues. So yeah, it's designed to be able to hand to a new reenactor, and they've got everything that they need to know about safe and reliable gun operations. But I've also had, you know, people who have been shooting flintlocks for decades tell me that this either, you know, reaffirmed things that they already knew, and they learned stuff, new stuff in here as well. So I've had nothing but good reviews on it. But you know, I'm not a historian. I'm an engineer, so I'm liable to make mistakes, of course, and I'm always welcome to feedback on there so that I can, you know, make corrections and keep giving people good information. But yeah, I sell these on my site on Shope Arms, along with different gun tools and things.
And I'll get that down into the description. I know we had originally talked about going into the Hessian, but I think we should just make that its own episode. The plan is to have this being a repeat not a repeat, but a continuous live stream. So there's no reason for us to go 3 hours on the first one.
I mean, I got all the Hessian stuff there. If anyone wants to ask any specific questions about it.
Josh, the whole reason here is that this allows me to make content, and then I can just keep on using and abusing you for future times. If anyone has any questions, please get those out. We'll kind of start the wind down process. In the reenacting world, we generally sleep with the firelocks inside the tents. Do we know if that's what they did, or did they have like a certain tent?
No, absolutely not. The only time that you'd be sleeping with your firelock is probably like if you're bivouacking, like if you're, you don't have a camp set up, you're just like sleeping under the stars kind of thing without your baggage. But if you've got tents set up, then you have musket racks set up, and the muskets are going to be under guard, like cartridge boxes with them. Like you're not going to have your soldiers just kind of like, I mean, I imagine that when you're doing like a drill weekend or something, in the current military, you don't just like walk around everywhere with a loaded gun, right? You check it in and out at the armory.
Yep, you have an armory card, like a library card.
Yep, so it's real similar. I mean, obviously there's not like an armory that you check in and out the guns with, but you'll have them either in a bell of arms or stacked or grounded or on a rack or something like that. But yeah, when you're just like in camp, unless you're on guard, then you probably don't have your musket with you.
I found that interesting when they talked about you would check out cartridges with your names on them or your initials on the cartridge. When you went on the guard duty, I think it was like 6 cartridges or whatever. But then at the end of your shift, you would turn your cartridges back into the corporal of the guard or the sergeant of the guard, whatever is applicable. So that is pretty interesting.
Powder's valuable.
Yeah.
The Germans had an NCO rank called Capitaine des Armes, kind of I think between a corporal and a sergeant, and they were responsible for the arms of the company. They weren't quite a gunsmith, but they had some specialized tools. And one of their duties was they issue the powder to the men, and when someone comes back from watch, they pull the rounds, they pull the cartridges, keep the powder, and they issue them new ones. So like all this stuff is definitely being tracked and maintained.
So a lot of original American flintlocks, they have initials carved onto the buttstock. That's usually a good way to trace it back to the Revolution era time period. It's hard to really tell. Do you think that's something a private a gun owner would do regardless, or do you think that could be tied to the military? A little bit of both, a little bit. I've never really thought about that until you just kind of brought it up. I was wondering if that's kind of like how they remember, because or did they just not? Would they not care? Would you turn in, a company's worth of firelocks, 68 firelocks? Here you go. I wonder if that'd be interesting to kind of dive in on.
So I know, I know more about the Hessian army and their practices because it's very well documented. And they had, rack numbers engraved on the guns, and then the Capitaine des Armes would have a book. He would have a journal with all of the rack numbers of all the company's muskets and the name of the soldier who owned that musket. And with that, then he would know, like, oh, this one's rusty. Hans, go clean your shit. So I know that they were definitely not allowing soldiers to like carve initials into their guns. I think the British kind of the similar sort of deal. The Americans notoriously undisciplined, and a lot of them were bringing their own guns. I know a lot of them in like 78, I think they started to stamp U states on the property, but I imagine that it wasn't like established practice for everyone to carve their initials into their musket. It could even be done after the war if they kept it, took it home with them. It's really hard to say. There's not really anything that I've seen that specifically bans the practice. So Nothing to suggest that this was like a problem. Like there's no general order from Washington that says, hey, tell the men to stop, marking their initials on government property kind of thing. There's just the orders for stamping everything with U states. But like you said, we see it. We see initials carved into guns. It could be the owner. It could be an inspector's mark. It could be the colonel's initials, of that regiment. The colonel buys all the guns and issues them out. Really, no idea. There's a lot of different potential options for how widespread that was, whether how tolerated it was, and all that.
You're talking about the depot systems where the American would send arms in to get reworked, and one of them was in Philadelphia. I think it's called. There's the Philadelphia Supply Agency, and then there's the two factories. There's the French factory and the American factory, and they rework firearms. And you would think the French factory would rework French arms, but it actually reworks American arms. It's just paid for by the French. But one of the inspectors that is remaking is Joseph Perkins. And you can actually find what's thought to a credit to him, these IP marks, and then he becomes the first superintendent at Harper's Ferry Armory. So
that's very
kind of
cool.
interesting, because he marks his mark is on the butt as well. But yeah, the British do the rack marks, and then I'm just trying to think. I don't think I've ever seen like a rack mark, number mark on Revolutionary War era American flintlocks. You get the U states. Mm-hmm. Which Congress, like you said, the Congress says it, and then George Washington, there's a dispatch where he's like, take your arms in to get them marked. So it's either United States or U states, and then in the 1780s, you start to see U.S. because people were walking off with government property. So then you get those guns that were United States stamped. Then they go into the war ends, they go into the arsenals, they get reworked, and then they get the U.S. stamp. So it's United States, U.S. It's just shows the history of the stamping, and that continues all the way to this day. U.S. government property is on M16s and stuff like that.
Very cool.
But what do you want to end on there, Mr. Shope?
Man, I don't know. Do we have any questions that came up?
No, it doesn't look like it. Anyone has any questions? Kick them off. We have Saludos, a gentleman from Colombia, Victor Gonzalez. Hello, Victor. Welcome to the chat. Yeah, just talking about how hard. I can't even imagine forging a lock or a wrought barrel or even the smallest parts in a lock, like the fly from hand forging. All of my knives are hand forged, but can't imagine forging tiny parts. Yeah,
so they weren't forging like a finished product. For like a sear, this thing that is like a 1-inch L. Really, they're just gonna bend a piece of metal and then file. It's a lot of filing mostly. And the better you are at the forge, the less filing you have to do. But for the most part, you're shaping everything with the file. There's evidence of them using dies. I have in here. Yeah, this is the Journal of Historic Arms Making. This is another really good reference. Journal of Historic Arms Making. The National Muzzleloader Rifle Association did a run of these. The originals are from 1986. But they go through like all the different components, like how everything is made. All the different stages of a tumbler mill, all that stuff, and a page of notes that I took. That's all the different thread pitches for a Pedersoli and an Indian brown Bess. So, fun fact: if anyone wants to know, the corkscrew on a Pedersoli is an M8. So there you have it. So they've got this right here. That guy, that is a gauge, so that you can test fit pieces. And you've got screw mills here. These are screw mills that you're using to hone down the shaft. You've got a piece that's like the size or slightly larger than the head. You turn it down. These are basically single diameter lathes. You spin it in there and turn it down into that. Let's see. Looking for something on. Here we go. Here's an example of a forged die. So you've got your steer right there, and you see this like puddle around it of metal. It's, it's wrought iron, so this stuff is real soft, and they just pound it into this very simple die to get your shape just that much closer to the final product. But then from there you're starting with that, but then it's all file work to get down to your end product.
That's crazy.
And same with like here's your bridle. Where am I? There's your bridle, and the like fresh from the die bridle, and you're filing down till you get something like that. So they definitely were using dies to make this process a little easier. But for all these little parts, it's a lot of file work.
Yeah, there's a lot of handwork there towards the end. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to, I'll let you close it on what you're working on next. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, I got a... What's that?
Oh, just go ahead.
Okay.
What you're working on next. And,
I won't touch it, but I've got this right here is a India-made Potsdam musket that I am modifying into a Hessian musket. I found the Hessians didn't really mark their stuff, so it's infuriatingly difficult to know if you have a Hessian something or not. Their buttons are plain, their muskets are plain. And so, as far as I'm aware, nobody has gotten a confirmed Hessian musket. We've got some Brunswick muskets from the Saratoga campaign that we are fairly confident in their provenance, but I have not heard of any actual Hessian muskets. So in a 1770s Swedish, or rather German translation of a Swedish military manual, are an illustration of 4 different guns: a Swedish gun, a Hanoverian gun, a Austrian Holy Roman Empire imperial gun, and a Landgraf Hessen Kassel infantry musket. So from that illustration, I am changing the carvings and the shape and the lock decoration of a Potsdam musket to better match a Hessian one. And the main feature of it is this carving right here, this sort of like curvy arrow looking thing. I don't know if you can actually see that very well, but when you're doing stock work, you use the light to kind of see what's happening. You see this line going across. As I move the light across it, it helps me to find high spots, so you can see like where you've got some discontinuities in there. But yeah, so stripped entirely of all that nasty lacquer that they put on the Indian guns, and it'll get some nice oil with a little reddish sheen to it. And this will be, as far as I know, the first confirmed reproduction of a Hessian infantry musket. So it's kind of cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Hardy's Hat 4972 said, "Sorry I'm late. Didn't know you were going live." That'll be the plug here, is that every Sunday for at least the next couple months at 3 p.m. Eastern, give or take, we have a little bit slower start. I'll be having on different experts, authors, veterans in the field, and we'll be talking about different things. Josh was so gracious to offer to be up first, and yeah, we're kind of, this episode's going to be wrapping up. We just wanted to cover tools, but gives us plenty of time to bring you back for a second time, Josh, and then
we'll go over some of the
that's
unique features of the Hessian kit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So that next time will be the Hessian kit. So,
Cool.
Josh, if you want to do your shout out for your stuff, and then we'll wrap it up, man.
Yeah, Shope Arms, or shoot me an email at shopearms@gmail.com. I do repairs for Flintlocks. I can do different tools. Working on making worms, custom calibers and thread pitch for ramrods, stuff like that. So yeah, check out the website and hit me up if you've got any questions about getting Flintlock working.
Awesome. And are you going to be at Guilford?
Oh yeah, I'll be there with Von Boza.
Okay, so it'll be a Guilford Courthouse reenactment. I think that's this upcoming
Next week.
weekend.
Yeah, next week.
Next week. We do have one question, actually.
Cool.
What about the gun shop German musket?
The gun shop German musket.
Is that rifle shop? Is there a rifle shop German musket?
There's a Prussian musket. I know. I don't know if they have one called a Hessian. And see what you get.
Yeah.
See what comes up.
They have the 1704 Prussian musket and then the 1809, which is what we generally just call the Potsdam, right?
We call so there's the 1740, that's a Potsdam, and then the 1809 is also Potsdam. It's similar to Charleville. Potsdam is just the city that the gun factory is in, and it's
Okay.
engraved Potsdam Magats on the lock plate. But yeah, so I know that Rifle Shop does those. There's several importers of Indian guns that make Potsdams, the 1740s ones. But they're just, they're a little different. Not terribly different, but enough that I thought that it'd be kind of cool to change it into a Hessian gun instead.
Got my hands on. I'm looking at. I'll send you a picture on Facebook of German Potsdam. Man, that thing looks beautiful.
I know.
Cool.
Yeah, I wasn't too keen on them at first because it's an unbridled lock, and we can maybe talk about that at some point, what that means. But they've grown on me a lot.
All right. Well, Josh, again, thank you so much, and a good hour and 15 minutes, and yeah.
Cool.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in again. Cartridges and casings. Here's my little spiel. YouTube live streams going to be dedicated to military history from the 17th century all the way to the current. So yeah, every Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern, give or take on the time, and I'll let you know who's coming up at least a few days prior. So a little rough off the start here, Josh, but on my end, that is to get this thing going. But we're learning. But,
yep, we are.
Thank you for your service there, Cossack, 82nd Airborne. And yeah, guys, until next time, take care.